Welcome to Brew Builds, your place for DIY home improvements. I'm Paul. Today I'll be working on our front door that is binding and no longer latching after we had some heavy rains. Are you ready? Let's fix this. So our front door stopped latching after we had some heavy rains. Fortunately, the deadbolt still works to keep the door shut. Also, if you look up here, you can tell by this crack that this wall and door are having some stress issues. So another way to tell that this door is having some sagging issues is by looking at the gap at the top of the door. It's larger here towards the middle of the door than it is by the door jamb. Also, when I open the door, it'll start rubbing when it gets to about there. So that's what we're going to fix today. Tools and items needed: a cordless drill driver, a pair of pliers, a hammer, a punch, a wonder bar. Then I discovered that I will need a drill bit, a countersinking drill bit, a chisel, a bench-vise, and wood glue. So I got my wonder bar here, and I'm going to remove the door trim on this side. Hopefully there's a quick fix that I can do by just adjusting a few things, and that will keep the door from sagging. If not, I'll take the door off completely, and then I can rework the door jamb area, which in essence would pick up that bottom corner of the door and straighten it. So let's get this door trim off and see what we have. On the brew scale, technical ability I rate between a novice and an expert. You do need a basic understanding of door framing. Physical ability I rate as easy. Other than picking up a heavy front door, you don't need that much strength. It's a good idea to run your utility knife down the corner of the wall in the trim. That way when you pull the trim off, it won't peel any of the paint off the wall with it. Then take the wonder bar or a small pry bar and carefully insert it behind the trim. Begin to gently lift the trim off the wall. You can see here I didn't cut the paint enough with the utility knife, and a little piece began to peel off the wall. Shouldn't be too noticeable. Loosen the whole piece of trim before you remove it to prevent any breaking or cracking. Then, carefully pop it off with your hand. Looking at the door jamb, you can see there isn't any shims between the jamb and the stud, so I can't move the jamb any closer to the stud. Also, I see a crack, which might be the issue of why the door is sagging and not latching. There is some space at the bottom of the jamb, so I could add in another shim to help pick up the bottom of the door. But I think I'm going to have to take this door off to get a better look at this crack and at the door jamb. Before we go any further, here's a quick lesson on how a door is framed. When framers build a house, they build the openings for doors and windows using studs and headers to what is called the rough opening size. The door jamb sits inside the rough opening and is attached using shims and finishing nails. Adjusting the shims around the door jamb is how you make the door perfectly square so it opens and closes properly. Hinges are then used to attach the door to the door jamb. Where the hinges are mounted can adjust for a wall that isn't perfectly plumb or vertical. To allow the door to close and seal tightly against the door jamb, a cut known as a hinge mortise is routed or chiseled into the door and jamb. Now, it is possible to adjust for a sagging door by placing spacers between the door and the door hinge. While it is easier, this can lead to odd gaps between the door jamb, and hinge. I prefer adjusting the door shims. I decided I'm going to take the door off by removing the hinges and leaving half the hinge attached to the jamb. You could remove the screws out of the jamb and that would release the door. I'm going to take the pin out. It's easiest to have a little punch. A lot of hinges have a hole in the bottom, and that is where you stick the punch to hammer the pin out. Well, these don't, so I'll have to use a pair of pliers. What I don't like about using pliers is it's very easy to chip the paint off and mark up the steel pin. So just gently grab it and start to wiggle the pin as you pull up. Once there's enough space to get a pry bar underneath the pin, I'll use that with a hammer. I still prefer using a punch. So I like to get each of the 3 hinge pins out about halfway before I completely remove them. Just be careful when using the punch that doesn't slip and cause you more work. Once the pins are halfway out, use the pliers to remove them completely. My preference is to leave the top pin as your last pin to take out. That way it won't fall on top of you. So I'm going to take the bottom one out, then the top one. Front doors can be rather heavy, and most exterior doors that are solid can be rather heavy, so just be prepared for quite a bit of weight. Alright, so we have the door off. I'm just going to slide it this way. I'm going to take these 4 screws out and see what the wood looks like underneath the hinge. You can tell by the 8 screw holes this is not the original hinge or door. Also, as I mentioned it before, there's no shim in this area, so the jamb is right up against the stud, which means I can't move the jamb any closer to the stud, which would raise up the opposite side of the door. So I need to figure out if I can repair this, or do I need to replace the jamb completely? You can see the wood flexing here, and that's probably part of the problem. So I decided, after looking at how much is involved in replacing this piece, I thought I would attempt to actually repair it first. I'm going to glue this crack, and hopefully that will fix the problem. I have a clamp. I'll clamp it this way, then stick some screwdrivers in between the stud and the jamb to force the crack together. And hopefully that will fix the problem of the sagging door and rubbing on the floor. I'm using a screwdriver to pry the crack wider while trying to squeeze glue into the crack. Wiggling the screwdriver a bit can help the glue penetrate further into the crack. I'll do a quick wipe with a paper towel and water and then put the clamp on. Once the clamp's on, I'll stick the screwdriver in between the stud and the jamb and give them a few taps with a hammer. That should tighten up that crack nicely. Once that's all set, grab another paper towel and some water and get off as much of the glue as you can now. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Alright, I'm gonna let that glue dry quite a long time before I attempt to put the door back on. And while I'm thinking of it, why don't you hit that like button, or boop it or bop it, whatever the cool thing is, but hey, give it a thumbs up. And why don't you subscribe to Brew Builds if you want to see more DIY videos like this one. And if there's a project you want to see me do, why don't you leave a comment down below. While waiting for the glue to dry, I checked some other areas that could be the problem. There is some wood behind the strike plate, so I'm going to go ahead and remove it with this chisel. It doesn't take much wood to inhibit the spring latch from closing. Knock out this piece.
That looks much better.
While I have the chisel out, I'm going to clean up the hinge mortise, removing any rust spots or extra paint. I need the hinge to lay as flat as possible. I'm going to rehang this door. I'm leaving the top hinge off because I want to check these holes to see how they line up with what's already here. And then I'll just be using 2 of these pins. So I cleaned the pins off, put a little bit of WD-40 on them. So I'm going to grab this door and get it in place and put these pins in. Kind of want to get it on top of the sill, and then you can get the bottom one in. But yeah, we're still not latching. This works well for adjusting the level of the door when you're working on it. Looks like the top hinge needs to go further towards the exterior of the house. And if I press down on the pry bar, I can get the door level. I'll pull the pin out so I can remove the jamb half of the hinge. I need the hinge to move towards the exterior to lift up the door when it's open. So I'll take the chisel and extend the hinge mortise into the jamb. Now with 8 holes in the wood already, I'm going to mark the best place to put new screws, then drill new holes into the hinge itself. I want to be as far away from the existing screw holes as possible to avoid any further cracking. I'm drilling the 4 holes using a 3/16 inch bit. Once those are done, I'll countersink each hole to keep the screws flush with the hinge. Now I'm just making sure that each screw fits and is flush. Then I'll do a quick sanding on it to remove any metal burrs. Well, other than looking like Swiss cheese, I think it should work. I'll put the pin in, then mark the holes to pre-drill the wood. Just need to make sure that I stop on the pry bar to raise the bottom of the door before marking the holes. When adding in the screws, place your foot on the pry bar to keep the door lifted up. The last thing I'm going to do is add another shim between the door jamb and the stud by the bottom hinge. Fortunately, I found this in the garage and it should work to pick up the inside edge of the door. Okay, let's see if this door will latch. Yes, success! I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something today. Be sure to subscribe to Brewbuild and check out some of my other DIY projects that you can do too.